Welcome, everyone. You've reached S.J. Thomason, and I'm here today with two very exciting people that I met on Twitter a while ago. I have Paulogia and Shannon Q, and Paulogia and Shannon Q are atheists, and I'm a Christian, and today we're going to discuss some really tough questions that atheists have for Christians and Christians have for atheists, and we're going to have a little back and forth, and it should be a lot of fun. So I really appreciate everyone for listening in. And I want to go ahead and I understand, I just discovered a few minutes ago that Shannon and Paulogia met in a unique way. They actually met, well, maybe it's not so unique because this is how we met too, right? So, but they met on Steve's channel. And so Steve McCrae, I'm assuming, right?
Yep.
Steve McCrae's channel. So would you like to maybe start off, tell a little about that? Because I think viewers would probably love to hear about that. And I know you both live in Canada, but you're pretty far apart. Or sort of far apart, and if you just want to share that, that'd be great.
Okay, Paul, you go. Go, Paul. You do it.
So I guess it was last summer. I was prepping for Eric Hoven's big Genesis Paradise Lost movie, and I had done a particular video regarding some of the financing of how that movie came about. And Steve wanted me on to do a live chat about it, so I went on. I hadn't done very many live chats at the time, But at that time, that was before Non Sequitur. Steve just pretty much let anyone on, whoever wanted to talk, and so suddenly, a girl came up in the chat, and it was Shannon Q, and I was like, "Hey, I recognize that name from Twitter," and because if anyone follows Shannon on Twitter, you know that she creates a swirly whirlwind of Twitter excitement.
She does. She grew her account. She's even got a YouTube channel that grew to thousands of people in like a month.
So anyway, so Shannon came on and she didn't know how to work her camera. She sometimes was on and sometimes wasn't, and then she was pointing us at the trees because she didn't really want to be on, even though the video was on. But anyway, she seemed as smart and clever on the stream as she seemed to be on her Twitter account. So I reached out to her after that, and we started chatting about my channel, and she started giving me some advice and help on my channel, and we became friends and grew from there. So yeah, is that roughly correct, Jen?
Yeah, that seems equivalent to my, yeah. That's right. I liked his channel. So when he was on, I had some things that I wanted to impart to him. We were just about to go to Ken Ham's creation museum too. Right. You were just about, and that's what intrigued me more so than Eric Hoven's movie stuff, was you were about to go to the Creation Museum to go to an Answers News Live. And I wanted to impart some communication advice to you, which was, completely, I don't know, probably rude of me, but I was like, these are the things you need to know. And we became really good friends. And, a couple months later, we started dating. And yeah.
Well, that's neat. I love that. So before I forget to mention it, where can people find you? And Paulogia, I actually also realized you also have a very popular YouTube channel. Both of you do. And I actually watched some of your videos, and I realized, and I've always seen many of Shannon's videos, but I realized that you do actually have a lot of things on Eric Hoven and Ken Ham and the AIG group. So you want to share some of that and maybe share what your synopsis is of that whole group of people? Because I did see that, and now that you said you've gone to the Creation Museum, I'm pretty fascinated. So what did you find
I met
there?
Ken. I don't know if you saw that one. Basically, the short version of the background, for those of you who don't know me, I was a fundamentalist Christian for most of my life. I grew up in a Mennonite home, and only a few years ago did I start having some cognitive dissonance and wanting to investigate for myself, particularly some science stuff, because I'd done a graphic novel based on dinosaurs, and it started to really work in my head. So I went to Ken Ham's material to try to confirm for myself the young Earth creationist beliefs I had, and those kind of, rather than affirm them, Ken kind of made my beliefs fall apart. And then after that happened, then I started reevaluating, well, maybe this decades of ministry that I've been doing, I was in youth ministry for a long, long time. Maybe I should reevaluate that from scratch and just see if I can rebuild it without having any preconceived notions or with any presuppositions. And I found that I couldn't. So I am now an atheist, but largely my channel is dedicated to talking about the claims of Christians. And I think a lot of us even a lot of Christians watch my channel and say that I'm talking a lot about bad actors who are a lot of times making claims they can't support or biblical positions they can't support. So for me, I'm not anti-Christian as much as I am anti-young Earth creation position, and I would, I encourage people to be theistic evolutionists and all that kind of thing. So that's the gist of my channel, and I do animated fun things, and yeah, Paulogia. But you can call me Paul, SJ. You don't have to give me the full name the whole time.
Okay, I'll call you Paul. Shannon, now were you also, I know you were raised a Christian, but I don't remember if you were raised a young Earth creationist too.
No, not at all. Nope. No, evolution believing Christian. I didn't know young Earth creationism was even a thing until I was in my early 30s. I didn't even know that was a tenable position to hold. Didn't even realize it was a thing. I didn't see a contradiction.
I didn't either. I honestly can say until I went to Twitter, and this is in 2014, and started getting active on Twitter, I really had no idea that this whole movement was out there. And I also didn't know that there were such thing as flat earthers. Like I thought that was, and you find them in a, in a comic book. I'm sorry if it's flat earthers listening right now, but yeah, I was totally surprised that there's a very kind of a significant segment of people who are trying to make a name for themselves with the flat Earth idea.
Which is insane.
That's a really good phrasing, SJ. I think that's you hit the nail on the head with what's going on there. I think they're trying to make names for themselves as opposed to really
actually holding that position, because that position is bonkers, just flat out bonkers. But yeah, no, I never saw it.
Rather Gnostic to me, anyway.
Yeah. So that's pretty fascinating. So so we know where to find you, which is great. You can find you guys on Twitter too, and I know both of you are very active on Twitter. So I wanted to start off. We decided that we were going to ask each other tough questions, and they're going to ask me tough atheist questions, and I was going to respond with answers, hopefully that work for them. And if they don't work, then they're going to ask me to elaborate, and the same thing will happen the other way around. So I'll ask them a couple of Christian questions, and one at a time, and we'll see how that works out. And if I need elaboration, they said that they would give me elaboration.
For sure. And the converse is true too. We all agreed ahead of time that it's important that we all understand the questions that are being asked. Perhaps they aren't being articulated well. So reiteration, some mirroring, and some if we are able to speak the questions back to each other and impart that we have a good understanding of what the question is, I think that's a good exercise for all of us to undertake, to make sure that the questions we are answering are the questions that are actually being asked. That's important, because sometimes in these types of conversations, people talk past each other because they misinterpret the question or misunderstand the question. So I think that's a good exercise for all of us to undertake here, because I'm just as guilty of that as anybody else would be.
Yeah, and I was accused of talking past people. So I have been reading reviews of some of the things that I've done lately on debates, and I've been accused of that. So I need practice. So that's wonderful that you're willing to offer it. Put us in a forum like that. So we're practicing. This is almost like a mock, except for it's not really a mock, because you're true atheist. I'm a true Christian.
No true atheist.
Ask me a question.
We don't use that.
And I want to tell the audience, we did not tell each other what our secret question.
Oh, we lost SJ. Is it just me? Am I frozen?
I don't hear SJ either.
Oh, we lost her. Maybe me and you can ask each other questions. Oh no, SJ, you're gone. Come back. Come back to us, SJ.
Did you see in the live chat, or did we leave?
It looks like we're still there. And she is now just a picture. So hopefully SJ's on her way back. We haven't dropped though, and she's the host. Oh, Craig Reed's in the chat. Hi, chat. Maybe we can answer some chat questions while we're waiting. I don't know. Does the chat? You guys have any questions? God has spoken.
Oh, we're back. Okay, you guys, I got knocked off, but I guess I'm back on now.
Yay. Okay, good. Hey.
I thought I was in the middle of chatting with you guys, and all of a sudden I was like, I'm talking to myself, and your faces were frozen on my screen. So just put me back in. Sorry about that. So
okay.
No, I said
I gave good answers.
Did you hear what I said about, or were you asking me? Because I was going to ask you what the question that you asked Sean Mcdowell was, or whatever the question is you want to ask me. But that's where we sort of left off last night.
Shannon, do we want to start with the Sean Mcdowell question?
Or start with whatever you want to start with.
Go ahead, Guy. Like whatever you two want to do. Like I said before,
I know you were excited about, and sorry, SJ just said, we didn't share the questions with her. We haven't shared the questions with ourselves yet, so we don't.
Yeah, Paul and I didn't even talk amongst ourselves.
Oh, this
We're
will be
so unprepared.
fun then.
So anyway, we'll start with I know one that Shannon. We'll get to the Sean McDowell question, I promise.
Okay.
But we will start with I know one that Shannon wanted us to get to. So that is. Still there? Is she still there?
Oh no! Did she just freeze again? Gracious, this is tragic. Is somebody sniping SJ? Stop it! Stop it if you're sniping SJ. Goodness gracious. Well, why don't we tell the chat what the question is that we're going to ask, and then when SJ... Oh, there you are. You're back again.
I don't know what's going on with my computer. This is crazy. If I have to run downstairs and speak from down there, I will. I'm sorry, guys.
Totally okay. So we'll start with one of the questions that... And I mentioned this to Paul before we kind of even organized this, was that the question about the parent and child and one in heaven and one in hell, that question that you asked during the mock debate, I felt like Andrew gave the most honest answer to that question, but I didn't like his answer because I don't feel like it was elaborated on well enough, especially when it comes to free will.
Can I rephrase the question for them?
Yeah, please. Yeah, you go ahead. Yeah.
So, because I've had this discussion with my parents. So, if Christianity is true, my mother will go to heaven and I will not. And at that point, my mother has expressed to me that she will not be able to enjoy an eternity with God, knowing that I am in an eternity of suffering. And that's how she views hell. So, I know there's lots of versions of hell, but in her mind, she can't enjoy hell, knowing that I'm suffering eternally or separated or whatever. So at that point, it's not really heaven for her. So will God somehow make her forget me, which in her mind would change fundamentally who she is? Or will she really have, a bit of torment for all eternity in heaven, knowing that, her loved one is not there with her?
I think, and that's actually a really hard question. That's probably one of the hardest questions you can ask a Christian, because there are different views on that. Now, there's a couple of views that there's the more liberal Christian view is the C.S. Lewis adoption, where basically people who that there could be a, according to C.S. Lewis, this is his view if you read his book, Great Divorce, he has this idea that when you die, even after you die, you're still given the opportunity to change your mind and come back into heaven. And that's sort of how that whole book that he wrote as a fiction book had worked out. And so under that view, I think it'd be very likely that you would change your mind and decide that you would want to do that. Now, the question is, well, what happens if that's not the accurate view? Because depending on how you interpret the Bible and where you read into passages and what you think about the book of Revelation and the lake of fire, there's another view that's not as pleasant. And that view basically says that that people are going to be going to they'll be put in sort of a hold position until you have the final day of judgment. And upon the final day of judgment, those who were not in the Lamb's book of life, preordained basically to go into heaven, will be put into the lake of fire. Now, I personally don't believe that that's a literal lake of fire, because fire has been used quite a bit in the New and Old Testament to symbolize a lot of different things metaphorically, but including cleansing and that sort of thing. Some people even have taken the view that perhaps everyone just gets cleansed, and they look at the view of universalism, where everyone ends up in heaven no matter where you came in. But I don't think that's completely consistent with the Bible. So if I had to answer for my own kids, no, of course I won't be happy if my kids aren't in heaven with me. And I will be very aware if they're not in heaven with me, because I'm sure that God's not going to take our memories out of our heads and just let them float around somewhere. I think the reason we're on earth is because we're here to build our spirits and make our way into heaven. And I think that given time and given thought and that kind of thing, I think that most everyone, I think, would turn to Jesus Christ if they sort of are given an opening in their eyes of exactly what their purpose has been on earth, what his purpose was on earth, and what our purposes are in the future. So my response then is that I don't think my kids will be in hell.
But not even just specifically your kids. Like in Paul's scenario, his mother would be in heaven and he would definitely be in hell. So his mother is going to be in eternal torment, knowing that he is suffering in hell, regardless of what your interpretation of hell is. he's going to be separated. Like their relationship will be severed for eternity. They will never have contact with each other again. They will be eternally separated in that scenario. So speaking not just for yourself and your children, because, you know, you've raised your children to believe this way and you don't think that they're going to change their minds, but Paul has already changed his mind and his mother has not and likely will not. So in that scenario, does she forget him? Does God augment what she thinks about him or how she feels about being separated from him? Or, I mean, the C.S. Lewis interpretation where everybody gets a choice is problematic too, because if everybody goes through their life doing essentially whatever they want, and then at the point of judgment, they get to make the choice, then what's the point of being a Christian now in that scenario, right? Because no matter what you do, you get to make the choice after you die. So those would be my follow-up questions.
And actually, to build on that, I think that's one of that could possibly be a motive for people teaching in the church, that what you do when you're on earth really makes a huge difference. They don't want people to think they're going to have a chance after they die. I think I've seen it play out with some people where they, like I had an atheist who said he was an atheist, but he's really not an atheist because of what he told me. But he said that God once told him that, you know, said something to the effect that his love lasts forever, and his love isn't just going to go away on him, even if the guy had been having a hard time. And so, and according to him, he might as well just be a universalist. And I can see him doing things right now. I've noticed, I won't name this person, but I've noticed him doing things where he clearly thinks that it doesn't really matter what he does right now or what he says makes any sort of difference. And I think that might be one motive for the church to teach that just, you know, it really matters what happens here on earth. There's a couple of reasons why that could also be the case, because if we look at the case of Lazarus and the rich man, it really did matter what the rich man, in the parable that was told by Jesus, what the rich man, what he did on earth really made a difference. He suddenly couldn't get past the gulf between heaven and hell. So going back to the idea of Paul and you, actually, I'm sure are your parents still Christian?
My father would probably identify as an agnostic. My mother is very, very Christian.
Okay, so probably what's going on right now is there, for your mother and for Paul's parents, is there's probably some praying going on in the background, some secret praying that they see you in heaven, and they probably would not be happy. I mean, no one's going to be happy if you don't see your kids in heaven. Heaven wouldn't be heaven without your kids. I mean, I'll say that we've grown very much in love with our children, and you've grown in, you know, with parents, and you have children, so you know where I'm coming from on that kind of thing. But as far as I think that one thing that you just want to highlight is the fact, maybe question, why did you leave in the first place? And if you were in a situation in front of Jesus, what would you do? So, I mean, like, for example, Paul, since you, both of you asked this question, but what happens if everything's said and done and you find yourself at the pearly gates and you find Jesus standing there? What would be your response if you saw him? Because that might be all that matters.
Was Paul frozen? Oh, and Paul's gone. There goes Paul. He just messaged me. One sec. Am I gone? Yes. Okay. Well, you're gone, Paul. All right. So I feel like that doesn't even necessarily answer the question, though, SJ, because the question was, irrespective of what I do, if I went to the pearly gates and saw Jesus, sure, I'd be like, oh, shit, guess I was wrong, right? If I had that opportunity. But there's nothing explicitly saying that I will have that opportunity. That's an assumption that needs to be made to reconcile this. And what if I did reject him? What if I saw Jesus and I was like, you know what, screw you anyway, I'd rather suffer in hell for eternity. It's my mother who is going to be in heaven, who is going to suffer for that decision that I had made. I don't think I would make that decision, nor do I think that decision is necessarily going to be on the table based on scriptures. I think that's a reconciliation that people have to do in order to find a way to be okay with the fact that if your children make that choice, you are going to suffer, and you can't have an idea of heaven and also have it exist simultaneously with severe emotional suffering. Those two are inconsistent with one another. So in order to reconcile them, you have to make a lot of mental leaps and interpretations that aren't explicit in the scriptures. And then once you make those mental leaps and interpretations that aren't explicitly laid out in the scriptures, then you're either denying the scripture entirely, or you're saying only my interpretation of it is what matters, or you're saying that heaven isn't what we think it's going to be, or you're saying that it doesn't matter what we do on earth. And those are the only real options that I see, and all of them are difficult to contend with.
Okay, well, there's two things I want to bring up here. One is I also want to bring up, well, what about you? How would you feel if you knew that your mother was suffering in heaven because of your choice?
How would I feel if I knew my mother was suffering in heaven because of my choice? I'd feel bad, I suppose. Yeah, I'd feel bad. I don't want my mother to suffer.
Over whether or not you could make her feel much better, right?
Sure.
But we're in hell, so we're pretty much having a bad day anyway, right?
Well,
yeah. And at that point, that ship sailed at that point too, right? Like,
well, there's a day of judgment, and I'm wondering, I mean, that's the thing, the Bible's, if I go back to what the Bible says and even look in the book of Revelation, they make quite clear that we're going to die, we're all going to die, and that there's at some future point, and again, we say future, and it's hard to even understand that because that dimension's outside of time, but at some point, there's going to be a moment of judgment, and at the moment, then whatever happened will happen, and I know that in both of your cases, actually, I think you guys have a lot of Christian values. I mean, you could call them Christian values. If you were Muslims, you probably say they're Muslim values or something like that. But you've got a lot of good values that correspond completely with Christianity. So since God knows everything and he knows exactly why you've made the choices you've made, he can read your heart and he'll know exactly what to do about that. And maybe it could be that you're just in this period right now, and maybe at the age of, when you get the ripe old age of 50, you change your mind.
So, but I guess
I don't see it.
But the question is still like, well, let's say Shannon and I become really terrible people, and we start going on murder sprees and whatever. Like, it's still the question is about our parents, not about or my parent, but not about us. Like,
right.
Well, one thing I was saying, Paul, I think you might have been off the call at this point, but I mentioned that what about you? Because some of the control, then there's some factor of control in your hands with the decision that's made, even today, based on the fact that your mother or your father or someone has said, hey, listen, I would not have a good time in heaven. Say your mother gets towards the age where she's gonna pass away, and you look at life and you say, geez, I want my parents to be happy in heaven, or I want to find them in heaven. I want to see them again.
Right, but I'm a terrible heathen and I'm a jerk and I decide not to.
I don't think you are a terrible heathen and a jerk.
No, but
and I don't think you're even going that way. So this is like totally hypothetical, not you.
But I intellectually, I mean, that's a question for later. But intellectually, I'm not convinced, right? And if nothing changes, I can pretend that I'm a believer, but but I guess Shannon, are you still feeling like you're not getting the question answered specifically? Like, what happens to the parent who does God change the memory, or do they allow the memory to linger? I guess that's really the ultimate question, and I don't know if we had that answered.
Yeah, we're focusing on the choices of the child, and the parent can't control the choices of the child. I mean, you can make reference to us, but
here's what I think is going to happen. I think that because God's all-knowing and all-loving and does have answers for all of these really tough questions, I think that in heaven we would be given an answer that makes us feel that there will still be no tears, there will be only joy, there will be paradise. So I think that I can't really answer that very well because I don't have the full knowledge of exactly what the experience would be like in heaven. I know very little. From what the Bible says, it sounds like it's a new Jerusalem, that streets are paved in gold and that kind of thing. But I don't know the experience there, and I have a feeling that with an all-loving God informing me on exactly what's going on up there and exactly what the situation is, I think that I would be able to get those answers that are really tough. They're tough questions. So
essentially the answer is it's not possible to answer the question with what you know, that's a fair answer. I get that, and that maybe God will give you the answer at the time.
I sort of think that because it's a tough question, and he put us in a situation here on earth where we've grown to love our children, and so to ask us what would it be like if we're separated from our children, he just put us here with our children on purpose to so we could grow and love each other and grow our love.
There's a chance that I would choose to be eternally separated from God so that I could be with my kid.
If you thought your child's going to be in hell, basically, or is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think you're. Well, maybe we should go to. Okay, maybe since what Paul and since actually both.
Go ahead.
Oh, SJ froze again.
You're not having a good day.
I know. I should just run this stream. I'm the only one whose technology is.
When I was a Christian, we always used to say that God must be doing something really good because Satan is trying to make all kinds of technical problems. That's how we all. Whenever there was technical problems, that was Satan working. So God is having a good day today with whatever was happening here.
Do you feel like that was answered relatively well while we're waiting for SJ? I think that I can't answer that question as a fair answer because I don't think it's an answerable question. Really?
Right. I think it wasn't answered well, but at least she came around to saying that, yeah, there is no answer. So
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Hey!
I am so sorry. I don't know what's going on with my connection here. This is terrible.
It's demons. I'm telling you, that's what we said at church. It's demons.
Amen.
I'm telling you. Can I ask you guys a question?
Yes. Please do.
I want to follow up because you were smart to follow up on the video that we made last week with Andrew and Joshua, and I wanted to follow up on a video that I just watched again this morning. I've actually now watched it 3 times, but the one that was with Mike Winger, and so that Paulogia had.
Okay,
I'm gonna mute and drink rum because I'm excited about this.
Oh, no. Mute and drink. Let me actually quick say, I have a tea here that's really tasty. It's it has not just tea, but hot sauce and lemon in it. So I just want to say that's a really good drink. Anyway, so it isn't as adventurous as
no, but that's supposed to be good for your digestion. Really good, actually.
Yeah, it is. It's really good. It's a ginger spice tea with hot sauce and I change up the hot sauce. Sometimes I put chipotle. What is it called? I forget all the names, but I've got all these different hot sauces down, sriracha and those kind of things. Okay, so let me ask you first a couple of preliminary things just to straighten things out. Do you believe the apostles, and I know that from what you said with Mike Winger, is that you do believe that Peter and Paul believed they saw something when Jesus passed away? Do you believe that they saw
Peter? If we're limiting it to Peter and Paul, yes, I believe Peter and Paul thought they saw something. Yes.
Okay, good. So Peter and Paul did see something, or they thought they saw.
No. I'm sorry. They thought they saw something.
Okay, good. Thank you. So yes, they thought they saw something. Now, also in that same conversation, early on in the conversation, you mentioned that James and Jude might have seen something as well, or thought they saw something as well.
No, what I said was James and Jude were lent. I don't know what I said, so I'll just say what I think. So James and Jude, I don't believe wrote the books of James or Jude, but I believe that they were people. Essentially, I don't think we have any idea what James or Jude saw, or I mean, obviously they saw. I think they saw historical Jesus, but that's about it.
Okay. Or what do you mean when you say they saw historical Jesus?
Well, if James was the brother of Jesus, in a literal biological sense, the half brother, that probably he saw, Jesus playing in the yard and making some shelves and doing, whatever, that kind of stuff. I do not think that James or Jude saw Jesus after, or even necessarily believed that they saw Jesus after.
Do you think Mary Magdalene believed that she saw Jesus after?
No, I don't think we have any evidence one way or the other.
Okay. Do you think that well, there's a couple of different James, actually. There's James Peter's, I'm sorry, Jesus' half brother, and then there was a different James.
Right, because you lumped him with Jude, I thought you meant the brother. So do you mean
right? I did.
You mean one?
Because I think that's what you guys were talking about last week was the brother.
And we kind of dropped the James and Jude thing pretty quickly, and we moved on to the 12. But anyway, all that said. No, I don't think either. I don't think James, the brother of Jesus, nor James, one of the 12, thought they saw Jesus alive. I don't think we have any evidence to support that.
Okay, well, do you agree with the idea that the Christianity rose in peace over the first few hundred years until it was legalized officially by Constantine in 313?
What do you mean by in peace?
It was a peaceful movement. It wasn't based on war, about conquering people or anything like that. Prior to 313.
Correct. Yes, Christianity, yes, arose.
Okay, so prior to 313, we can agree that Constantine legalized it, and after that, I'll agree that yes, Christianity took some wrong paths. It went down some really bad paths, as I'll be the first to admit. But I just want to make sure we both get on the same page about, and actually,
now that's it. Well, I would just clarify that, obviously you also acknowledge that in the first century, there were lots of different flavors of Christianity that you may not, there was some Orthodox Christianity and non-Orthodox Christianity. I would think you would agree.
Right. And so yeah, and especially, I mean, you could say that the more unorthodox came about in later years. So you would say that when some of the
I think from Paul's letters, Paul was correcting doctrine left and right in most of his letters. I think that there was some bad doctrine right from the start.
Well, he was concerned. I think there was definitely a divide between what the believers, as far as the non-Jewish people versus the Jewish people, and whether or not they had to be circumcised and that kind of thing. There definitely
they were still going to They were still going to Artemis temples and things like that, right?
Well, they would go. They definitely were going there to share the news with people. Greeks and that.
All right. So, all right. Fair enough. We can carry on.
Okay. So we agree on a few things. Let me ask you this: so you're believing that two apostles? So basically, if I were to sum up your views, I have a book here. I just want to point this book out. So this is a book. It's a historical atlas by Jeffrey Wawrow, and in the book it says that by the year 313, Christians numbered between 5 and 6 million. And I have screenshots. I can get it and snip it to you at some point if you want to see proof that was said in this history book.
That's a little bit higher than I might have said 3, but I'm fine with the range.
Okay, so they say 5 to 6 million. So here's the case that I'm trying to see if I can get an answer to. So we both agree to a few points here. We agree to certain premises, and I want to ask you, since it sounds like you believe that the entire Christian movement was spurred by two men who only had visions, how do you think they were so convincing that suddenly between 5 and 6 million people were following the movement by 313?
Well, so do you think that the number of people relates to the truth of a movement?
I think the possibility of being able to spread from only two people, so you say only two people actually had this experience with Jesus, and somehow they were able to spread through the entire Roman Empire and into India and even into places like Spain, just with a two-person, unless I'm misinterpreting what you're meaning here, but you're saying that the whole movement basically was started because people believed that Peter and Paul had believed that what they were saying, that they'd seen the risen Christ. So you think just based on two people's visions instead of what Paul said when he said 500 people actually witnessed the risen Christ?
Well, Paul said that other people believe that. Paul didn't. Yeah. So yeah, and I see nothing supernatural in the spread of a movement. So there were lots of things about Christianity that were unique. So for example, at the time, most people were what we would call pagans, right? They worshipped all the gods. And this is actually why I was talking about doctrine, because in general, it was quite possible you didn't necessarily convert. Converting was a uniquely Christian thing, to deny the other gods. And certainly Paul was, and other letters, were telling people, no, we have the one, you can't just add Jesus on. But there's evidence that people were just adding Jesus on as yet another thing that they were doing. But a lot of people think that the uniqueness at the time in Rome, of course, they attributed a lot of their war success to what whatever god they were worshiping would do. So they were constantly looking for who's the best god. And this is actually what convinced Constantine, he actually called Yahweh God, the Invictus sun god, because they were all looking for what the most powerful god. And one of the things that became very popular about Christianity was they claimed to have the best god, so great that you actually had to convert. And they were also very moral people. These are a lot of things that when you read the history of those first couple centuries, lots of very human things, are attributed to the growth and success of this movement, not the least of which was that, at least at the start, people didn't necessarily reject their other pagan polytheistic ways. They just incorporated Christ into it, or they would call Sol Invictus, Yahweh, and they would do what they would always do. Like, oh, well, you call God this, we call our God that, and we call it the same thing. I guess I don't see, and my comeback to you would be, what about that do you feel is necessarily supernatural? We've seen Mormonism, we've seen Jehovah's Witness, we've seen Islam. You don't think any of those are true, and yet they grew rapidly. And I know you think there's special circumstances that, oh, because there's special circumstance X that, you know, there was suffering, or special circumstance X that there was not very many people. But we've seen religions grow based on less than 2 people. So I don't, I guess my follow back to you is, I don't see anything supernatural that's required for this to have happened. So what do you see that required supernatural, or even required truth?
When you're done your exchange. Sorry, when you're done your exchange, I have a question, because I think that there's one thing in SJ's question that I'm not sure I understand. It sounds like you, SJ, are asking Paul if he thinks all of Christianity is based on and predicated on the claims of Paul and Peter. But that doesn't make sense, because Paul, was already persecuting Christians. So Christianity already existed. I think
oh my gosh,
can you hear me? Oh no. Esther's gone again. I'm gonna finish my question, and maybe Paul, are you still there? Can you still hear me? I'm
still here. Yeah.
Okay, good. So it sounds like SJ's asking you if you think that Christianity was just based off of Paul and Peter, but I think that you were just referring to Paul and Peter because those are the only two in the Bible that claim to see the risen Christ. So you weren't necessarily talking about the origins of Christianity. You were talking about the evidence for the resurrection. Right?
I'm using them both, because actually I don't believe that only Paul and Peter are the only people who claim to have seen the risen Christ in the Bible. If we look back at the Bible, we can see in the Gospels we have a number of eyewitnesses. We've got all of the women who made the discoveries. Wait.
Do we have any documents that say, I am Mary Magdalene and this is what I saw?
Do we need that? Is that something that
I'm asking if we have that, because you just said we have. You just said we have an eyewitness, so I wanted to.
Oh my gosh, I keep getting dropped off, guys. I'm sorry. I keep getting pushed.
Oh, you're back, I think.
I'm sorry. I don't know. My internet connection.
Don't want us to talk today.
I swear, this is crazy. Okay, no. Well, let me ask you. Let me go back, because here's what my belief is that we have Matthew the tax collector. We have Luke, who actually traveled with Paul, as detailed as starting in Acts 16. We have John, who was one of the apostles, who he basically referred to himself at the very end of the chapter of John. We have Mark, who is a good friend of Peter and has been known to associate with Peter and wrote in many cases from Peter's perspective. We have James and Jude, who are the half-brothers.
Hold on. Those four. Those are character names. And those are names that were as far as we know, the earliest usage we have of those are centuries later. We have lots of quotations of those passages without using those names. So, and none of those gospels. You tweeted something saying, Luke says he's the author of Luke, and like Luke, the word Luke is not in either Luke or Acts. So, what do you mean when you say we have eyewitnesses? That those four specifically, because those four.
Darn it! Hello.
Hello. Oh, this is such a good conversation. This is frustrating. I'm frustrated. I didn't buy a ticket.
Okay. Okay. So what do I mean when I say Luke? I'll go back to what William Lane Craig says about this kind of stuff, because William Lane Craig basically says, what do the names even matter? All of the early church fathers attributed the Gospels, not all of the early, but no, the early church fathers who did attribute the Gospels to names attributed them to the four names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, whether those whether those names were really of, Matthew was Levi, Levi's Matthew. We've got different examples like that. Whether those, but there's no early church father who claimed that those Gospels.
Well, but that's an argument.
No, but let me just finish. There was no church father who said that these belonged to any other people besides Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right?
Right. So you fulfilled my argument from silence, which is no one until the 3rd century attributed those to them, and lots of church fathers like Polycarp, Ignatius, and others quoted these books wooks without names. The books do not have the names in them.
The names aren't required to establish a historical text. It was
But
something
but you're saying they are eyewitnesses. I'm not talking about historicity at all. I'm not talking about historicity at all. You're saying you know who wrote them. And I'm wanting to know on what basis you can be so confident that you know who wrote them.
Well, I don't think that who wrote them makes as much of a difference as what is actually in the text. So
Okay,
I think that the message was something.
But then you should stop saying that it was Matthew, or stop saying that it was Luke or Mark, or you should do what most, frankly, even when I was in Bible school, I always said the author of Luke, the author of Matthew, the author of Acts. You shouldn't say that Luke said this or Matthew said that, because you don't really have the evidence to support that. And if it doesn't matter, then why not just say the author of Matthew?
Okay, why don't we go back? Let's go back and we'll talk about Luke, since you mentioned Luke. And Luke says, here's what Luke says in the beginning of his thing. And whether it's not, his name is actually physically Luke, or it's just a person who was called Luke, the person who wrote the book of Luke started it off. And this person said, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who were from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the Lord. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I decided to write an orderly account to you, Theophilus. Now, Luke continued his thing in Acts, and in Acts he actually started traveling.
To teach until the day I was taken up to heaven. Yeah, I know.
So, well, then in Acts he started traveling with Paul.
No, he didn't.
Sure, he did. In Acts 16, he starts referring to their travels in a we form. So he refers to everything that they were doing in the we form.
But also, he just told us that he stitched together accounts from everyone, right? And the very few we passages in Acts are considered by a lot of textual critics to be very different in grammar and form than the other texts. So the we could very easily be the author of Acts, stitching together accounts. But even if it is accurate, like I'll grant you, right, for today, I wouldn't grant you normally, but for today, even if I granted you that the we passages mean that he was a traveler, you don't know that it was Luke. And that also, Luke never claimed to have even met Jesus. So Luke is not an eyewitness.
Well, my point is that Luke, and actually, even if you get to the Acts 15 part in here, we can see that Paul had met with all of the apostles in Acts 15. And if we go to Acts 16, we start with Luke referring himself and traveling with Paul. So Luke was very much, whether or not his name was Luke, the person who wrote Luke and Acts was very much in with these people. He was in with all of the apostles, and so he was talking to eyewitnesses.
Okay, but how is that
fair to say?
Eyewitnesses to what?
Eyewitnesses to the eyewitnesses of Jesus. We have people like here, he's interacting with Peter, he's interacting with James, there's interactions with John. So we have, and plus all of the apostles are actually, it's mentioned the 12 basically. And so
no. But Luke didn't interact with all those people. Luke was stitching together documents from all those people. Luke was interacting with Peter and Paul.
And Peter and Paul had interacted with all those people. So that's fair to say.
Understood.
Okay, well, I did. So we're on the same page. So I guess I'm just saying, I guess one of the points that I want to make is when you take together all of the different documentations, like one of the things that Mike Winger said with you, and I think that needed to be followed up on a little bit, was looking at what would be the best explanation for the fact that the tomb was found empty. They never recovered a body.
No. There's no empty. They never recovered a body. I could grant you. There's no empty tomb. No, not even Paul references an empty tomb.
So no, well, no one in the early history of the church. Now, I hope we can come to an understanding on this. Was there another theory from the early people in the church that there was another place that Jesus was buried besides the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea?
Among Christians, no. Among but normal people.
Okay, do you have a reference to that, Paul?
We know from Josephus, we know from Josephus that most people who were crucified, I know Josephus spots a few exceptions, and that's how we know that was an exception. Josephus outlines very clearly that most people were buried in mass graves. There's nothing about this whole story that is inconsistent with Jesus going into a mass grave, which we know was the most common case. So there's no other explanation needed other than Jesus was thrown in a mass grave. No one knew where he was after that because it was a mass grave. So what more do we need? Paul doesn't mention an empty tomb. Like there's no this empty tomb idea That's not historically acclaimed. That's not attested by anyone outside of the Bible.
Yeah, we have in the Bible that it's attested that there was an empty tomb, and we also have no claims to the otherwise. We have no claims that says it was a mass grave. You're using speculation based on other people, but also just know that the Romans at that time did allow the Jews to use to fulfill their laws the way that they decided to do.
On exception, and not in Jerusalem. Like where do you like you asked me for when Josephus talks about exceptions? Those were the exceptions that Josephus talked about. Like the mass grave thing was by far and away, like they wanted to embarrass people. They didn't let all the Jews do this. Josephus was clear on that.
So Paul, if that's the case, then why would the early Jews have made the claim basically that the early dog is shaking back here?
Yeah,
why would the early Jews have made the claim that somebody stole the body and there was a concern that somebody stole the body?
How do we know that happened? By what? Where is outside the Bible? And that's not in Mark, the earliest gospel. Where other than Matthew, do we even suggest that they made this claim?
Okay, well, I realize you're going to go with, I guess, the 27% of the consensus that basically says we're not totally clear in an empty tomb. According to Gary Habermas, which you did support,
Gary Habermas,
73% of people have supported the idea of an empty tomb, correct?
What people, SJ? What people?
73% of people who study the New Testament have supported the idea of
but not historians. So the number of people who I studied the New Testament, I went to Bible school. I would have attested that too. In fact, I was required as a student to sign a piece of paper before I started saying that I would always attest to it. So that's not really that impressive. But anyway, sorry. Let's not talk about consensus. So you were laying out my position. Yes, there's no outside the Bible evidence of Joseph of Arimathea or an empty tomb or any of that stuff.
But there also, just to be clear, there's also no outside of the Bible evidence, aside from speculation, that Jesus himself was buried in any other place besides an empty tomb. There's no proof from the early ancient times that anyone says Jesus was put into a mass grave. No one said that. Can we make that clear?
There's barely even evidence that person existed.
Okay, so we have evidence that we have people saying that there was an empty tomb, and then we have Jews claiming that his body was taken away and they hid the body. But you're saying that we have even though we have zero evidence from anyone in the ancient times that says that there was going to be a mass grave. You're saying that it makes more sense that whatever we have already written down is untrue and that he was put into a mass grave.
Are you telling me that Josephus doesn't talk about mass graves after crucifixion?
I'm saying that Josephus never said that Jesus was put into a mass grave.
Okay, but you would acknowledge that was the standard practice.
No, I will not acknowledge that was a standard practice for Jews who were crucified. No, I won't necessarily say that.
Okay, you would say that it was a standard practice, that it was a common practice for a lot of the people.
I'll say it was a common practice, but I think that Jesus was distinctively uncommon in that they actually chose to sacrifice him in place of Barabbas.
How do we know that?
Obviously.
Like, if you believe the Bible, SJ, just believe the Bible. Like, none of these, like, you're just giving me fragments of the Bible and trying to point to like one little common thing. And it's like, well, if you believe that, you believe all of it. So where's the evidence outside of it? Like, if you try and build this case without the stories from decades later, from the people who believed it, you don't really have anything.
Well, I don't think so. I think we've got a lot of cases outside of the Bible. And I know that earlier this week, I sent you a list of the 9 secular sources we have within the first 150 years of who have aspects. Is that not true?
You broke up and I didn't hear the question.
Oh no, she's gone again. Oh, damn it. I'm so enjoying this interaction. This is fascinating. As somebody who hasn't studied the Bible as much as I probably should, I love these conversations.
She might be back.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Viewers in the audience, I'm sorry I keep getting knocked off. I just want to say a shout out real quick as I see a bunch of people that we all know in the audience. So it's kind of exciting. Oh
my gosh. Eve's in there. Hi, Eve.
So we have Eve, GPA.
I don't know you, Eve, but you've blocked me. I don't know why.
Pine Creek. I've talked to Pine Creek,
Hey.
Josh Brister, Keon. So we got a bunch of people here. So thank you,
Doug's in
everybody, for
there.
coming on.
Hi, Doug.
I want to actually, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something that I think that, or actually maybe you guys can go to another question for me, but I wanted to say something that you did say, Paul, that I think is important and I didn't want to miss. You made a couple of really important points, and one of them was, and that I actually agree with. I agree that people were looking for the best God. I think we're both on the same page there. They wanted to see which one was going to be the most helpful, and that makes complete sense. I mean, that's sort of how you would be if you're anyone who's looking for a divine power, basically. But another thing that you said that I think is a great point is you mentioned that the early Christians were very moral people, and a lot of people might have joined that because they wanted to be like those people.
Yep, I would get that.
So that, and one of the things that I think you and I could both agree on too is that the early Christians also were very helpful in taking care of dead bodies. I mean, I actually saw studies where they talked about in the old days they used to just sort of let the bodies, you know, they'd take the bodies away in these like little trolleys and go put them in a grave, like you mentioned. But as far as the early Christians, one of the things that they decided to do was bury the dead. It was very important to the early Christians to take care of the dead instead of just to haul them away into those big mass graves.
Okay, so I know we got way off track on like Bible things, and apparently well, it doesn't matter. I asked you, and hopefully you weren't gone, what you saw in all that required supernatural elements, like what you saw in that, and what is completely unexplainable, you know, without a divinity. What in the rise of the early church, because I know this is your big thing, or at least it seems to be your big piece of evidence. What about that required divine intervention? Is unexplainable without divine intervention.
Okay, well, I think it's unexplainable versus a best explanation. So I look at what is the best explanation for the facts that, and this is what I believe, and you don't have to believe that, but I do believe that there was an empty tomb. I believe that Jesus had disciples.
You talk. Your evidence is the growth of the early church. You keep going back to that with me all the time.
I'm going to come to that. Let me I've got my 5 points.
Okay.
So I know you don't agree with the empty tomb, but I'm just going to say for me, one of the things is the empty tomb. A second thing that I find very powerful is the fact that during Jesus' ministry, his apostles and even his brothers were denying his ministry in a way. And then after he passed away, suddenly there was a big change in the church and in Peter and Paul, who was once persecuting Christians, and all of the early apostles, even including 2 of the brothers, Jude and James, changed their positions because they said they saw the risen Christ. And so the question is, there was no body ever produced. No one ever produced a body of Jesus. And another point is the movement just grew. Now, I know that you can say that's an ad populum fallacy, that the movement just grew. But if it were based on a movement that just grew from 2 men who had visions, I think we have very skeptical people back then who might have looked at them and moved the other way. But just putting all of this stuff together, I think the best explanation for example, for the apostles' bravery and martyrdoms in many cases was the fact that they believed what they said they said they saw, and they said they saw the risen Christ.
Okay, well, you know that my position on the martyrdom is that we have no idea whether any of the 12 were actually martyred, right?
No, I think you actually agreed with when you were talking to. I actually heard you when you were talking to Mike that you were okay with the idea that James, it was written down in the book of Acts that James had been martyred and that Stephen had been martyred,
but those were not the 12. Those are not in the 12. Neither James nor Stephen were part of the 12.
Well, actually, James, who's mentioned in Acts, is one of the 12. So
James or Herod, yes,
right.
Pardon me, but Stephen's not.
Okay, Stephen's not. Stephen actually even gives us a little more support because he wasn't traveling with them, and we saw what he was willing to do. He was our first martyr. He was actually witnessed by Paul, so that's something to note. Paul was actually one time pretty terrible towards Christians, and he had a nice change after that. And then we can look at some of the other things that I think you had agreed with Mike that Peter was martyred from the evidence that we have from the early church.
No. I don't, because there's very conflicting reports, and if you want to go with the most popular one, where he's hung upside down, you know, in that same apocryphal gospel, I think it was Thomas, or maybe Philip, I forget which apocryphal gospel it was, where we get the source of him being hung upside down. You know, Jesus comes in and comes back down from heaven and rebukes him for being a jerk. Like, it's not a good story. We don't have, and Mike agreed with me on this. We do not have, so he backed off on that. Mike said, we don't know from the 10. So if you take off Judas and you take off James, the rest of the 10, we don't have good sources for what happened to them. And the, go ahead. And Mike backed off on that. He threw it away.
We have Dionysius of Corinth, Tertullian, and Origen each confirm the martyrdoms of Peter and James, and the martyrdom of Peter and Paul. I'm sorry, and the James martyrdom was documented by Josephus,
right? And I granted those
and Clement of Alexandria. So I
granted all those.
Okay, so that's fair. So you granted a few martyrdoms.
Oh wait, Peter. I don't know if I grant Peter, but I'm distracted. But James and Paul certainly, but we have no record that James, could have recanted or that he believed it, or, we just know that Herod lopped his head off. That's all we really know. Anyway, but what I guess I'm trying to get the answer to, like, what you with me, you often come back to the growth of the church, and you leave all that other stuff aside, and you go to how could the church have grown from 2 people to I think you said 5 to 8 million is what the number you want to use. I'm fine with that. Up until Clement of Rome. What of that is supernatural, because that's the one you point to, and you don't lump in the other things when you talk about it. Or am I wrong? Like so you're saying it's a cumulative case. There's actually nothing about the growth itself.
I think the growth, and I think I tried to add that in there to highlight a point that I think that if the church were based on merely the visions of 2 people, Peter and Paul, which if they were not supported by any of the other apostles and any of the other people at that time, and Paul again in 1 Corinthians 15 indicated that 500 people saw, including the 12. I think if it weren't supported, and even the other 12 weren't supporting the idea that they weren't saying that they themselves had seen the risen Christ, then I don't think the church would have done what it did. So I think that we have evidence just from looking at how the early church grew that these people were saying that they saw the risen Christ. That's all I'm saying.
You think that the 10 would have somehow, like, this church was growing in Rome and it was church and going all over the place. You think somehow that Bartholomew would have been in Galilee and somehow got word to Rome that, hey, I don't think your story's checking out. Like, do you think that's what you're trying to tell me might have happened?
No, I think what happened, and I think, even have in Acts 15 where they all got together and they were chatting, but I think what happened in the early church that's pretty fascinating is I think that I think that there were a lot of people involved, and it says in the book of Acts, it documents the way it grew, and it says that God kept adding to their numbers daily, and they kept each going out and
spreading. Right, but not the 10. God kept adding to their, so more and more people believed it, and I totally, of course, more and more people believe that, but these were not people who were in a position to know.
Well, let me ask you this, Paul. Are you saying that the original apostles, do we have any evidence that the original apostles gave up and went back home?
We don't even have evidence that they were people.
Well, we have, because you basically are saying that the Gospels aren't true, Acts isn't true, blah, blah, blah. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Okay, so you don't buy.
So I think those are legend stories that grew. Now, I'm willing to grant that he had. I was being a bit of a jerk there. I would probably say that he had disciples. I don't know if those were the 12 disciples. I don't know. Probably because the tradition is consistent. But we don't know what happened to Bartholomew later.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure what happened to Bartholomew either.
So I'd have
to look that up.
But you keep referencing people who weren't in a position to know. Like, of course it grew, but none. Like so someone got converted, and they're it was all about social circles at the time, and so you're telling your people in your social circles, well, this Jesus is pretty cool, and here's his story, and that story spreads. And did they believe it? Of course they believed it, but they weren't in a position to be verifying an allegedly empty tomb. What are they supposed to do? They're all supposed to travel from Rome to Jerusalem and look, and here's an empty tomb, and here's an empty tomb right beside that, and here's an empty tomb right beside that. Like, it's not like this was not a fact-checking society. It's not Google. These are people who believed in all kinds of gods, and they're used to everyone sharing who the new cool gods were from the new town that we just learned about.
Well,
This was a
I
common
think actually
practice.
you're giving me some more support for my position, because that's one of the things that we noticed that happened in the early church. It was easier for Paul when he was over there in Jerusalem to convince people of what had happened with Jesus, because they were all privy to the discovery of the empty tomb and the whole story of Jesus before. But it was harder when he went out into Greece and he was working on people there. In a lot of cases, even we see it through his epistles and Acts, he had a very hard time when he was in these other places where it wasn't as easily confirmable that they had even an empty tomb. So people would have to figure that out for themselves. I think
Can
that you
you show
also
me
have
where?
to. Well, I think you also have to give people credit for being no less skeptical than we are today. We're all skeptical. I mean, no one wants to believe.
You're telling me that people who believed and worshipped in dozens of gods in their daily life were more skeptical.
Do you think that Marcus Aurelius was skeptical?
I think he was pragmatic.
Okay, because Marcus Aurelius, now let's note, he was around 300 or so. I forget exactly what year Marcus Aurelius, maybe 250. But Marcus Aurelius was not a believer in Christianity. He was one of the Roman emperors who believed in the gods. A lot of, actually, if you read his book, it's not like it's illegible. It's written by a very intelligent man who wrote the Book of Meditations, and it's something that I think supports the notion that people were intelligent back then. We also had Socrates and Plato and others.
He was intelligent, but he also felt like there was no separation between what the gods were doing and what his military conquests and things like that. Like how the state was doing was based on choosing the right god and all that kind of stuff. Like I don't think you believe in Sol Invictus, and I don't think you believe in a lot of the other gods that they were doing at the day. Like they obviously weren't skeptical enough.
Well, I don't, maybe some of them were. I mean, we actually have evidence that people like even Aristotle was pretty skeptical. So,
yeah,
so
and I think a lot of those emperors and those Caesars were, they were pragmatic people. They knew how to rule. There's a reason why when they took over a new region that they would allow those people to keep their gods and would even like incorporate some of the conquered people's gods into their own pantheon, because you want to pragmatically, you have to rule this giant Roman empire that ranged from Europe to Africa, let's say everywhere, to India. You have to be pragmatic about this stuff. So of course I would expect the Caesars to be pragmatic about.
I would too. I think you and I are on the same page with that. And one other thing that you brought up a little bit earlier that I think I forgot to mention again was you mentioned, and I was really glad you did mention this. You mentioned the idea of why am I forgetting his name all of a sudden? 313. What was the name of the guy in 313? Constantine. You mentioned Constantine. Yeah. Yep. And you mentioned the way that Constantine decided that he would move to Christianity. And I just wanted you to see, or let us know if you know what the story behind that whole thing is with Constantine moving to Christianity, why he chose Christianity.
So there's, if you want to, so there's different historical sources on his conversion, and they all conflict greatly. But if you want to take the amalgam of them, is that before a battle, he saw a vision of what he felt was a cross, and he declared that because of this vision that he had of the cross, that he wanted his soldiers to put crosses on their shields and various other cross markings. And he later found out that the cross mark, and he won the battle. And in later, and I could be totally wrong with this. This is just my understanding, because I'm not a historian very well. That based on that victory, that he later called people together and said, "Well, what is this cross marking supposed to represent?" And they said, "Oh, well, that's he found out that was Christianity." I know it's also intertwined with that his wife was a Christian, and there seems to be some question about whether she was a Christian before or after this event. So obviously, a lot of men convert for women. I look at J. Warner Wallace and a lot of these other people that really their stories are that they had girlfriends who were Christians. That's why they converted. So it wouldn't surprise me that your wife is Christian, you become a Christian. But he had this vision. According to historians, he had this vision. He decided that there should be the one God. However, he actually called Yahweh Sol Invictus. He continued to use the sun god in his coins and all that kind of thing. He basically took Christianity on. He decided that having one God that was the best one to worship, because all the Caesars before him worshipped a whole bunch of gods and they weren't successful. So does that ring true with what you understand?
I think that's perfect. Yeah, maybe you saw the same show I saw on TV.
No, I just read books. I don't watch the documentaries. But anyway.
Okay, good. No, I wanted to highlight that because you mentioned that a little bit earlier, and I never got to that point. So, so I've asked you a ton of questions, and I think we've gone. I want to give you guys a chance to ask me a question if you have another one. I think you asked your toughest one right up front.
But... No, we didn't. That wasn't even our toughest
one.
So, do you want to know? So you mentioned Sean McDowell.
Yeah.
So I had a chance to meet Sean McDowell.
His book.
Yeah. And one of my other questions was going to be about his dad, but that's okay. So Sean McDowell. I had a chance to speak with him, and I asked him the question you've actually attempted to ask once, but we had only like 90 seconds or so to answer this question. So it's kind of two parts, and the second part depends on how you answer the first part. So the first part of the question is, can you believe something that you are not convinced of?
Oh, that reminds me. I think one of you guys has a dog too, don't you?
Yeah, that's my beagle. She's currently dreaming about bunnies because she's sleeping in the sun and doing this little thing. Yeah.
Cute. That's cute. Can you believe something that you're not convinced of? You know, that actually reminds me of exactly what you two said in that debate.
It is. You had 90 seconds once to answer this, and I'm giving you longer.
Okay, so do you believe it's something you can? Well, I guess the follow-up question that I have to first ask before I answer that is what would it take to convince you of Christianity? What sort of evidence would you need?
Is that relevant to the question? Like I'm not even talking about Christianity. I'm talking about anything. Is there anything you can believe without being convinced of it?
Well, I can believe that the sun's going to come up in the morning. I guess I'm convinced because I've witnessed the sun coming up in the morning and I don't mean literally coming up, but I mean the way that the Earth's moving. But yeah, I can say that we have day, we have night, those kind of things. A lot of them are witnessed by what our experiences are.
Beliefs that you are convinced of.
Right.
What's an example of a belief that you are not?
Okay, I am not convinced that the Earth is flat.
But do you believe?
But you don't believe it.
Right. I reject that notion.
So the answer to the first part of the question is you cannot believe something you're not convinced of. Can you echo that for me?
Exactly. I agree with you.
Can you echo that for me?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I would not agree with if I'm not convinced of something. And actually, again, the reason why I'm not convinced of a flat Earth is because I found evidence indicating the Earth is a globe.
Okay.
Right.
So but I just want to make sure you're understanding the same question. So can you repeat back to me what you think I'm asking on that first part of the question?
Okay, that's fair. So you're saying, can you believe in something of which you are not convinced? And I'm saying, no, I will not believe in something of which I'm not convinced.
Okay. So given that, so this is actually what I asked Sean McDowell. Given that, is it fair for a God to punish me forever for something for which he has not provided a standard of evidence that would convince me?
Knowing what standard of evidence would convince him because he's God.
It's so tough because I don't know Paul nearly enough to know exactly what fully changed your mind. I think that since both of you were raised Christian, there must have been something that was like that moment, that aha or the epiphany or something that you had that completely changed.
But what's irrelevant though, SJ? What is irrelevant? The fact is that we're unconvinced. We aren't making a choice to be atheist. We aren't saying we believe in God, but we're choosing to act as though we don't. We don't believe there is a God. The reasons are irrelevant to the question. The reasons are irrelevant. They could be good, bad, fantastic, awful. The reasons are irrelevant. The fact of the matter is that we are unconvinced. Whatever standard it takes for us internally to be convinced has not been met for us. So that, to my estimation, is something that is outside of my control. I cannot control what threshold exists for me to be convinced of something or compelled to believe something. That is something that is tacit within me that I have very little control over. So if that is the case, if it's not a choice that I'm actively making, you would to be an atheist about the existence of God, if that's not my choice, then who is God or anyone else to judge me for it?
Well, because I do actually think it is your choice. Let me just tell you.
Can you choose to not believe in God? Can you?
Yes, I think you can choose to not believe in God.
Can you choose to not believe in God? Can you make an active choice right now? Can you change your mind in this moment because you made a choice and not believe in God?
Not based on the evidence he's given me. It would actually be very dishonest.
Not a choice. Then it's not a choice unless you're calling me dishonest.
No, I'm not. Let me hear me out, because I've got two reasons why I think that I want to explain this. One is because I was older than you when I came back to Christianity. Okay, so it was a few years after you even are right now that I suddenly was given some signs from God that were very compelling, and I started getting these signs, about 7 years ago. So all of my life, I spent about 20 years moving around, and suddenly he starts giving me signs that I hadn't gotten before. I could have easily been in your position as more of an agnostic back in those days. In fact, I was studying up on Greek. I don't mean Greek, I mean Eastern faiths and that. So I was in your shoes, and then sort of in your shoes, and then suddenly he gave me evidence. So I think that God will give you evidence that convinces you. I fully believe that. And I also can mention my sister. She's not had that much.
I've had cancer. I've had 4 weeks to live. I could be hit by a bus. I'm not convinced right now. You would acknowledge that I could die today. I could even take my own life today. Whatever. But God would be judging me for something that I have no control over, if indeed I'm being judged on whether I believe in God or not. That's
Well, I should probably say what the Bible's position is on this, because as you guys, I'm sure Christians have probably been throwing this verses at you left and right, but I know Romans 1:20, right? So I know you know that. So it kind of says, it says that you do know. I don't know what to do about that. I know that if I'm with a Muslim and a Muslim pulls out the Quran and it says you know Allah, and I'm going to be like, shut up, get out of here.
So your position is that we're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, that we do believe, but we're acting as though we don't?
I just don't think you've asked God. That's all.
I have. We were Christians.
But I don't think, maybe it's that you haven't asked God at the right time, or you haven't, maybe it's he's waiting for a certain, because I had asked God too. I asked God in my 20s and my 30s, and
even
I never
that being the case, that's still not our choice. We didn't do some arbitrary thing that somebody else is telling us. We didn't engage in some activity that somebody else is telling us is necessary, when in fact we very likely did. And I describe my deconversion as involuntary. It had death pangs. I tried to hold on to it with everything that I had, and I just couldn't. It happened to me. I didn't make it happen. It happened to me.
I lost my family. I lost business partners. I lost a lot of things for intellectual honesty.
Well, again, I'm not going to make any accusations because I hardly know your situations. I really don't know either of your situations. I do know that you're very nice people, and I do know that, and I think you're honest. So I think that you feel that this is an honest position. So I'm not going to say anything that's going to sound at all disparaging. All I want to say is that I look at someone like Jordan Peterson, and he's not fully believing in Jesus Christ. He likes the idea of the Bible. He thinks the Bible has some fascinating stories. It's almost like an onion peel, where it has the more you dig back, the more you find. But he actually says,
he thinks that's great too.
He actually said, I know, he says something that I think is kind of interesting. He says, I live as if there is a God. Now, would you say that's fair, that you live as if there is a God, or you say you live as if there is not a God?
I live as if there's not a God.
I live as if this is all there is.
Okay, so that's fair. So I wouldn't it seem it'd be a safer? I don't want to go down the whole Pascal's wager. I don't want to do that, but it seems like if you have either we can all live the same exact way, but if one person has in mind, hey, there's a God, and I'm going to ask God to open his doors to me.
Do you honestly think that Pascal's wager works? Do you think, is God fooled by me pretending that I think he exists? Is that really the level at which God lets the ticket in?
When I say to pretend, I don't really mean to pretend. How I came to God is because I was asking God to open my eyes, and I honestly just really wanted to know. I wanted him to show me the truth, and he opened my eyes, and I just started seeing things that made a lot of sense. And all those questions we have about Jesus' resurrection, to me, the best explanation for all of that information, like why they were brave, why this church rose in power, all this kind of stuff, to me, it points to Jesus as being
right,
the
but
truth.
it doesn't for us. And so I guess the question, you're not really answering the question, and we thought we were going to answer the question. So is it fair for God to judge us for something for which I have zero control over, and that is my own standard of being convinced I have no control over? And so God has not provided evidence that meets my threshold, whether you think my threshold is good or bad or whatever. It's mine. God made my brain. God hasn't provided that level of evidence. So is it fair that I'm going to be judged for something of which I had no control over?
See, well, I'd have to, and I can hardly speak. Number one, I can't judge God. I'm not going to judge God. And number two, I can only say what it says and hear about you. And since I believe in this, I have to say that what God would say is everyone has the evidence even outside in nature. He basically says that in Psalms.
So why is not everyone convinced then?
I think that there might be some reason why you maybe don't want to be convinced. I don't know what it could be, though. I can't.
No, not me. People. Like, obviously, there's going to be all kinds of situations why people aren't convinced, not just me. But God's standard is that you're trust that you believe it, right? Like that's the only thing. That's all you need to. I think you agree with that version of salvation, right? It's not works based. It's just faith.
I do believe in that. Yes.
Yeah. So all it requires is this faith. All it would take for me, I'm obviously seeking this. I obviously have read the Bible a lot of times. He hasn't provided something that meets he made my brain, right? He made my brain. Even if it's sin cursed, he made my brain. And my brain requires a certain threshold of evidence, whether that's the same threshold as anyone else. God made my brain to require this certain amount of evidence, and I can't be convinced. I can't believe something I'm not convinced of, and I'm not convinced of this. So the only ticket I have to heaven is to be convinced. Does that work?
You can't convince yourself.
I think if you don't feel like you can convince yourself and you don't feel like you're convinced, I think that according to the Bible, that's sort of on you. So
okay.
That's all I can say. We should probably, I don't think I'm going to give you guys a very good answer because I know you don't like what I'm saying, and I'm just saying what's in here as far as the Bible.
So you're saying essentially the Bible says that we do believe and we're suppressing it.
Yes. I have to say that that's what it says, and I can't really go against that.
But your first question,
so that's you saying that you know our minds.
That's why I asked you the first question. Can you believe something you're not convinced of?
I think that if we go with what the Bible says you have been given the evidence. It's just a matter of whether or not you're accepting the evidence.
No, it's not a matter of. Okay, well, you're saying that I am convinced, but I'm ignoring that.
Essentially, yes.
That's essentially what the Bible says. So that's the position.
Yeah.
Okay, you can understand why someone who does, like Shannon and I, who desperately our lives
wanted to believe
so much easier. My life would have been so much easier if I could have believed it. That rings a little hollow. You can understand that, right?
No, I think it seems because I'll be honest. I'm not an atheist. I've never been an atheist. I was questioning things, for a while there, but I always had in the back of my mind that God exists. I don't know. I mean, I can't even imagine what it would take to convince me that there's not a higher power after all of the evidence that I feel he's given all of us. So. But I don't think he's given people some of the evidence that I've been given. I've actually had some pretty significant spiritual experiences.
You understand, though, that in order for that position to be tenable, essentially what you're saying to me and to Paul and to everybody that's like, we inherently believe one thing, but live our life and present ourselves as though we don't. That's what would have to be accurate for that statement to be true. We would have to believe it, internally feel and know that God's existence is true, and then make a choice to present ourselves and live our life as though we didn't believe it.
Now, I won't say that that's my position, but I'll say that that's absolutely the position in Romans. So yes, that's exactly what it says.
You did say that was your position, though. You said that.
Well, I have to agree with it. I can't take a position against what it says. It says.
So you're literally saying that I believe God exists. Shannon, believe that God exists. Believe specifically that the Christian God exists. Have chosen, despite the fact that I believe it, to reject it outwardly and live my life as though it's not something I believe, even though I believe it.
Well, here's what it says. It says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." That's what it says. I mean, I can't help it. That's just there.
Yeah, so if you want to feel better, about life, you're giving the same answer Sean McDowell gave me. Sean gave me the same answer to the first question. He said, no, you can't believe something you're not convinced of. And then he danced around in almost the same circle you did, and saying, well, I guess I don't know you, so I don't know all the things that might have happened. But the Bible says so, and even if it doesn't make sense, the Bible says you must have enough evidence. Anyway, so you're in good company. I'm actually gonna do a video here posting. I have on video Sean's response, and I may cut this one in.
Oh, all right. That's just great. Let me, and that's fine. That's fine if you want to do that. I keep finding videos that are on YouTube when I just type my name in every once in a while, and I'm like, what are all these rebuttal videos doing here? I don't even have time for this stuff. Okay, so let me.
So it's your turn. It's your turn.
Let me ask you this. So, and I know that Shannon loves this topic, so I decided that I'd bring it back, and we have talked about it lots, and I know she even probably knows what I'm going to ask. Do you know what I'm going to ask, Shannon?
I love so many topics, SJ. I have no idea what's going to happen.
So I know you like the topic of objective morality, and so you do love it. And so I just wanted to see where your position is. Let me just, before I mention that, I just want to give a prelim. Hold on just one second.
Can you make sure you define what you mean by objective reality first? Perfect.
Yes, so there's a study here by Kinnear, Kearns, and Doutharibes from the year 2000. They collected data from Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, humanism, atheism, and the United Nations. And they identified the following list of universal moral values, which were supported by most, and in some cases all. So it's a commitment to something greater than oneself, self-respect, but with humility, self-discipline, and acceptance of personal responsibility, respect and caring for others, like the golden rule, and the last one is caring for other living things in the environment. So essentially, all humans have this innate hardwiring that makes us, that's an objective because it transcends humans.
What do you mean by objective, SJ?
I mean, what I mean is it's not a shifting goalpost. So instead of being relative to a population, it's objective. It's something that all humans strive to be like. Like all humans strive to be good to other humans, basically. We all have that inner knowledge that we should be good to other humans. Would you say that's fair?
And what do you mean by innate?
Well, I mean that it's something that basically you're born with. You're biologically predisposed to this disposition where
currently,
you have a knowledge.
Do you mean that was always innate throughout time, throughout all of human history it was innate, or it's currently innate?
I believe always throughout human history, since Adam and Eve, we've been wired essentially with the knowledge of what the duties are, what we should be doing, what we ought to do, and how we ought to treat our neighbors, and how we ought to be selfless.
So throughout history, if we look at the way that humans treated each other, and even currently, if we look at the way humans treated each other, we should see that reflected in human action?
Well, this is what you're seeing from all of these surveys. We're seeing not necessarily that the actions match up with, or the behaviors of the actions match up with what we know we ought to do. So they've done a lot of cross-cultural studies, and they've identified some cultures, like I've mentioned this before. The United States is self-enhancement oriented. However, we all have this inner knowledge that we should actually be benevolent and universalist. So despite the fact that we are what we are, it doesn't always match with what we ought to be. Where does the ought come from, is I guess what I'm trying to say. We have this ought. These are universal across all groups I mentioned, including atheists and humanists. So I'm asking, where is the source of this objective morality?
So you presented a study that shows that there's a majority consensus for these things.
Yes, going across all of the major religions, and even including atheism, humanism, and the United Nations.
So there's one other thing that all of those people have in common, and it's that they're human.
Correct.
So why does it need to be attributed to anything other than being a component of humanity?
Well, what is it? Where are we grounded? Where is the grounding coming from that's telling us that we ought to do this kind of stuff? Why ought we not just be selfish?
Why does it require a grounding to be true?
It requires a grounding to be able to assess where the ought comes from. I guess if you go back and you look at why was it we knew 100 years ago that we ought to do this, 200 years ago that we ought to do this, 300 years ago, we could go across cultures all through the world and we identify all of these things that for some strange reason, and actually the people like Shalom Schwartz, who's an international cross-cultural scholar, he was baffled when he actually found out that in his surveys of thousands of people around the world, every single country, regardless of what their current behaviors were or their current actions were, he was baffled that every single one of them knew that they ought to be benevolent and they ought to be universalist. Those were the two highest scores in every country. And it blew his mind.
So I think in order to have, a standard, in order to agree on anything moral, would you agree that one has to have, if two people agree on some morality, that they would necessarily have to agree on common goals? Because oughts are based on goals, right? Oughts are not. Is that fair to say? Like you'd have to have.
Yeah, like if I want to win a race, I ought to run fast, based on the goal being winning the race.
I guess it depends on what the goal is.
No, but if any two people, even if they're terrible people who are going to murder everybody, for them to agree on a moral stance, they would have to agree to a common goal. Would that make sense?
Yeah, I think the common goal is that you want to be good to your neighbors. I think that's the golden rule is a common goal.
So okay, so good. So common goals. And would you? So one of my goals is to maximize the well-being of the group. Now, would you agree that there's a biological advantage to maximizing the well-being of a group?
I would agree that could be a person's goal. Certainly, no, I could agree that.
Is there a biological advantage to maximizing the wellness of your group?
I think you could look back in biology, and there's probably showing that people who they have some evidence that basically says that in some cases empathy has been shown to help groups.
Okay. So
they've also had cases where selfishness has helped people to.
Okay, so that's actually that's the second flip side. So the other thing that I would build my pillars on is, so secondary to maximizing the wellness of the group is maximizing personal and so implicit in the other one is reducing suffering, because that goes alongside with it. But and then so secondary to that is maximizing personal choice or maximizing personal happiness. Would be the secondary. Now, would you agree that there's a biological reason that you would want to maximize your own personal happiness?
Yes, but that could also be at the detriment to the way you choose to maximize your personal happiness.
Oh, sure it could.
So if the way you choose to maximize your personal happiness is by going out and murdering other people because that makes you feel good, well, that's a problem.
Right, but you also agreed that lots of people don't act to the way they know they ought to, right?
Like exactly.
Lots of people put that second one above, but. So we've established there's a biological reason you'd want to maximize group happiness or group wellness. And there's a biological reason you would want to maximize your personal happiness. And that those two are always dance. So I think a lot of people on those things. So there's really, if those are the common goals, there's really no ethic on that list. Or is there, I haven't seen your list. Is there an ethic on that list that doesn't stem from those two desires, wanting to maximize the group wellness and wanting to maximize your individual wellness? Is there anything on that list that contradicts those two things? And if not, it can be entirely explained by biology.
Biology can only explain what is, Paul. It can't explain what ought to be. Biology, biology, ask any biologist. It cannot explain what ought to be. It can only explain current conditions.
I don't believe
biologically predisposed.
I don't even believe in the word ought. I don't think there's such a thing as ought. There's only ought in the realm of common goals, as Shannon said. If you want to win the ought only comes with an if. If you want to win the race, you ought to run fast. So I just gave you two. If we're going to agree that we want to maximize the group. And we know there's biological reason for that, and we know you want, and subsequent to that, you want to maximize personal health, wellness and personal happiness. Is there anything on that list that is not explained by those two factors? And
well, those two factors aren't fully explaining the biological condition that we're in. So, for example, because everybody also has a sense inside of them to be selfish. Look at babies. Babies are selfish.
Yeah, that's personal happiness.
That's the personal happiness part. That's
right. So
I granted that.
That goes in contrast, in stark contrast to exactly what we ought to do.
No, it doesn't, because
it's nested inside the group. It's nested inside existing within a group, because we're a social species. We need, in order to perpetuate ourselves, we need to exist within cohesive and functioning societies. That's something that we're aware of as individuals. So it can counteract selfishness, because in order for us to function and exist and be happy, we need to be a part of and participate in functional societies, because that's how our species has evolved. So if we choose to be solely selfish, we're not acting in our best interest, even though on the surface, if you just say being selfish is acting in your best interest, we're not, because there's immediate repercussions and we know it. Because if we act in only our self-interest, the other people that we need to live our lives and be happy and have relationships and have jobs and have friendships and have families and earn money are cut off of us. They're cut from us. We lose them. Which is why our group benefit is up in the hierarchy above selfishness. And there's an interplay between the two. It's logical to assume that you can only be selfish to a point before you hit repercussions. And when you hit repercussions, it's no longer beneficial for you to be selfish.
Okay, well, let's look at examples. Because I think that at least speaks to that. So we have the examples in the U.S. population, and I'm not as familiar with the Canadian population as far as politics, but we have examples in the U.S. population where there's a certain group of people who might be acting. In fact, it's been shown in the U.S. population that we're very high in self-enhancement, which is selfishness. We're very high population in selfishness, and a lot of that speaks to people who are trying to come across our borders, for example. We want to make sure they come across in legal ways, but we're also making it very difficult for people, even through legal means, through international visas and that sort of thing, to get through our borders. In fact, a lot of our people, we're losing a lot of our brains in colleges to Canada, because Trudeau has opened the door to a lot of people and stole them away from us. And so what I'm trying to say is that Canadians are taking our brains. I mean, that's
I was Californian, so I'm an example of what you're talking about. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is, so we have a significant contingent of people who've lived their lives being pretty selfish, really. And I'm not trying to, I know I have Republicans in the audience.
So what you're saying is that the group allows selfishness without repercussions. You exist in a society where your group has deemed it acceptable to be selfish without repercussion. So people can profit from selfishness within the society that you've created. If you create a society that doesn't reward selfishness, then you won't see as much selfishness. People act in accordance to their environments. If your environment does not allow you to be selfish and win and benefit, you won't be, because there's no benefit. It's a cost-benefit analysis.
It's a cost-benefit analysis that a lot of people don't conduct. They just basically decide they're going to act selfishly. And so I'm just trying to say that—
I'm curious what your ought was. What is the ought that you think is in that?
I think, no, what I'm saying is we have there's a huge variation in the United States between the is, which is self-enhancement. There's lots of selfish people. A lot of people, just are all about themselves, or they're about their inner group. They're definitely not about the out group. And they refer to the out group as anyone coming in from another country, for example, or even people who are in our country who are international trying to get jobs here. So there's that idea. And then there's the ought in the United States, according to Schwartz, that we ought to be benevolent. We ought to be universalist. We know that in the back of our minds, but there's still some people who are acting in very in manners that are more consistent with enhancing their own.
Right, and that fits exactly with what I said. So so there's the society that we want to maximize, and of course there's that infers tribalism, that we're most protective of our family, and then our friends, and then our city, and then our country. You know, and you know, as a species, we're most familiar. We both like cuddly mammals, and less outside of that. You know, the other animals that seem most like us. You know, so that's just biological. What you just described is perfect. It is fully explained by the balance of what is maximizing group wellness, and also trying to maximize your individual wellness. So these people can get away with X amount without harming their society, so they do it. Like everyone, all of us act selfish up to the point at which it stops being helpful. And then what you described is exactly that.
No, I think we can come to an agreement. I think here's what I'm trying to say. We've got societies. So all societies are different in certain ways. So each society has its own set of values, and they've done cross-cultural studies and indicated that you're more likely to be closer to the values of your society than of, say, some other distant society in a distant region of the world. So we're each more likely to be more like our societies, but across all societies, we all have these certain moral oughts. And one of them is, again, like the commitment to something greater than oneself.
You're inferring that they're oughts. Essentially, they're ideals. They're ideals that we want to hold ourselves to. That doesn't necessarily make them an individual ought that would dictate our actions. But we'd all like to think that we're more moral than we are, too. And then when what we instantiate. So what you're saying is across societies, people think or indicate that these things are important to them. Thinking and indicating that something is important to you isn't necessarily a mandate or dictate of the behavior that people will instantiate in their real lives. And what people instantiate in their real lives is what's important when we're talking about, especially objective morality. Because if morality is objective, it's not just what we're striving towards. It's very important to analyze what we see in the way of behaviors in the real world. And what you're saying is the behaviors that exist in the real world vary to a wide degree across cultures. The actual behaviors seem to be mandated by the cultural system that you exist within. That's what dictates the behavior. Even though you may have a potential ideal that both maximizes group and individual happiness, which seems to be the common thread, even though you have an ideal that might maximize both those things, you can't instantiate them because your behavioral morality, what you actually instantiate in real life, is completely mandated by the culture that you existed within. But those ideals can all be explained based on the schematic framework that Paul, like, how can they not be explained by the two hierarchies that Paul explained, wellness of the group and wellness of the individual in that order? How can they not? What about them? What about those ideals isn't explained by that?
Yeah, what ideal on the list doesn't match those two criteria?
Doesn't fall within and needs a supernatural explanation or an external explanation or some sort of objectivity outside of those designations.
I think what I'm trying to say is, okay, I think what you're saying, and I think we can fit this into the list. So you look at wellness for the group, and that could fit into the idea of commitment to something greater than oneself.
Sure.
And then you have respect and caring for others, and you have caring for other living things in the environment. Those are 3 of the 4 categories where the wellness of the group would fit in.
And those all have great biological advantage. All 3 of those things have huge biological advantage.
Massive, yeah.
And then you have, what is the because within, then the other one that you just mentioned, let me just say this, is your enhancement. You want to do things for yourself too. You have self-respect, but with humility, self-discipline, and acceptance of personal responsibility. So
that helps you benefit the group. That helps you be beneficial to the existence of the group.
Yeah, and within that, it's things like respect and care for oneself. Do not exalt oneself over or overindulge. Show humility.
That's not a universal thing. That's not universal. Go to a bar. Go to a bar on Friday and tell me if that is a universal trait. Women or men choose people who are the opposite of that routinely for biological reasons.
You guys are funny. Okay, well, I guess we've beaten this one a little bit long. I think we both have that. I think we can come to an agreement that that societies do know that we should be working to benefit the community,
for sure,
and we should be working to help others and to be selfless. I think we could all probably agree with that.
Humanism, right? Yay, humanism!
You've become a secular humanist, SJ. That's awesome.
Humanist.
I told you I was a Christian humanist. I don't know if I said that to you before. Okay, so that's I think we can come to some agreements on that. Now let me go. I'm looking at the crowd right now. I know we're getting kind of towards the end, but I wanted to see if anyone had a question for someone. We've got some people here in the chat. Would you guys be willing to take any questions from the chat?
Yeah, I've got about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so let me see here. Seeing if anyone's gotten here.
Got to get ready for the Golden Nuns tonight. It's an award night tonight. Gonna get my gown on.
Oh, that's right. I saw that. That's nice. What time is the Golden Nuns? That's on non sequitur, right?
Yeah,
I
think
7 Eastern, I think. Yeah.
Okay, Eve. I want Eve
9
to
Eastern,
clarify
9 Eastern.
which question. Eve, if you have a Eve says it's so frustrating that I can't answer the question as asked. So obviously I'm missing something in your question that you guys asked. So if anyone wants to say what I'm missing, I would love that. If you want to.
Maybe Eve could unblock me and ask me personally.
Eve, why'd you block Paul? Don't block Paul. Paul's cool.
Pine Creek. Do I believe Jesus killed babies in the Old Testament? What is that? Jesus?
Because if you're a Trinitarian, though, you believe Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God are the same, which means that if everything you believe God did in the Old Testament, you would also have to believe Jesus did.
I don't believe God killed babies in the Old Testament, though, is what I'm trying to say.
He's drowned them all in a flood.
I don't think that's how. Well, I don't want to go into that right now. That's not how it quite worked. Killed babies in the Old Testament by drowning in a flood.
The babies died. I think we can all agree.
Babies died. God caused the flood. God caused the flood. God caused the death of the babies.
I guess it's one of those things where you guys look at what you believe about life. If you believe there's life after death. Okay, so Eve says, why should anyone?
Oh, we should kill all the babies, right? Is that what you wait? We should kill all.
No. I would never say that.
Age of accountability. That would be awesome. Then they'd all go to heaven.
I think we all have a special purpose.
An abortion would be perfect. You'd be saving them.
So Eve says, why should anyone regard biological desires as normative? So
we shouldn't, but they're like but they explain everything. Like you were asking about explaining normative. What is normal? Like the normal is not everything, but we can explain it all. Everyone is different. That's what really needs explaining. If the laws of God were written on all of our hearts, why are all the cultures different? Why is every individual different? If this was really written universally on our hearts, that would need explaining. The fact that we all act differently is what makes sense. And the fact that we operate within norms is because of biological advantage. If I'm an idiot and act way outside of social things, I'm not going to live to have kids. And therefore, the genes that do that aren't going to survive on. I mean, I guess normative is weird. Shannon, I shouldn't have jumped in on that.
Oh, Paul, you're cute. So I would kind of mirror that. So essentially, it doesn't really. All we were looking at is what explains behavior. And what explains behavior from my perspective is biology and everything. I guess I'll ask a counter question. What about what we were saying doesn't make sense from a behavioral perspective? If you want to look at what we were saying and look at the behavior that people actually enact and then hold it to an arbitrary philosophical standard and ask why it doesn't match that philosophical standard, then sure, that's a different question. That's a question of what we as a species should act like, perhaps, or what we as a species should best do in order to fit a standard that we do or don't agree upon. What I'm saying is how we do act makes sense if you look at us from a biological perspective. It's not even about us, because I'm like Paul. Yeah, we can have discussions about how we should act, and I think they're incredibly valuable, and we should do it all the time. But having discussions about how we best should exist are very, very different discussions from how we do exist.
Well, let me actually, Christian diplomat, who's Steve, he says, why would the strong benefit from helping the weak who have nothing to offer them in an atheistic worldview?
That is a horrible, horrible, horrible perspective. And the actual name of is an atheistic worldview. I really, really, really dislike that. Now, an atheistic worldview is essentially a worldview where I answered a question differently than you. Everything else that comes from that is you imbuing it upon me based on your presuppositions about what an atheist is. Now, atheist worldviews differ dramatically from atheist to atheist. We all believe different things about how we should act. We all believe different things about life in general. So when I hear atheist worldview says X, that's frustrating to me because that's telling me that you haven't had an honest conversation with an atheist. So maybe start doing that. Now, what was the original question? Because I got sidetracked by the atheist worldview because that's something that frustrates me intensely. So,
well, I think he said it's one of those things when you look at biology and looking at certain advantages that people have and trying to strive for happiness or for self-transcendence and that kind of thing. In what reason would we have to help the poor if we can't show that helping the poor is going to benefit us in some way?
Oh, okay. I can answer that actually pragmatically. So I'm going to be unfavorable to an atheistic worldview to do this, just so that I can be incredibly pragmatic. Now, I would answer this question personally differently, but this is my pragmatic atheist worldview answer. So my answer is, from a biological perspective, how it helps us is demonstrating empathy towards others ingratiates us to other people. So if we demonstrate empathy, then other people think we're good people and gravitate towards us, and we benefit socially, potentially economically, from those actions, which is why some people pretend to be ethical when they're not, because they know that that's a fact. That's why some people represent themselves to be better than they are, because they know that's a fact.
That's why my Facebook feed this Thanksgiving was full of people showing themselves serving Thanksgiving dinners.
Exactly. So that's your pragmatic answer. That is your incredibly pragmatic answer that speaks specifically to the lowest point of human nature. Even if you're just looking at the lowest representation of human nature, it still makes sense. I think we have an innate sense of empathy that's been imbued to us through centuries and thousands of years of evolution, where we have demonstrated that treating even the least of us well benefits our groups, benefits ourselves, gives us good feelings. So even from a selfish perspective, when you help somebody, it makes you feel good about yourself, because based on the standard that we have in our society of what it is to be good, you've just met a standard of what it is to be good. Like even from the psychological perspective, even if you look at it incredibly pragmatically from a behavioral perspective, there are still reasons. Even if you want to look at us as selfish, there are still reasons. So if everybody would just stop with if we're all atheists, then we'd all just be killing each other and be completely selfish. Because we'd still need to exist with other people. We'd still need to exist with other people.
But I think you and I are on the same page that there is a standard that sort of guides our actions that we aspire to or that we find ideal, correct?
I think that we can have a discussion about potentially what that is and why that is. I don't know that we can say that there's an objective standard. I think that maybe the three of us in this room would agree that there is a standard that we would agree upon, and we can each give different reasons why we agree that that's the standard. But sure.
Based on the two things I said, that's all you need.
But I'm just saying that we, and actually probably the best form of empathy is a form that you do selflessly, that you're not doing for your own personal benefit. Would you agree to that?
I agree that when you're saying it out loud, that sounds like the best. But can you tell me honestly for yourself that that every time you've ever done a good thing for somebody that you knew you wouldn't get anything in return, you didn't to some degree do it because it made you feel good?
That's exactly why you do it. And so it makes you feel good.
No.
It's exactly. I think God made us that way, and I think there's another line in the Bible that says your conscience will convict you because He's given us this conscience.
I know you think God made us that way, but there's also biological. You agree that there are biological benefits to those things.
Yes, I do agree that there's some biological benefits. I think that biology can explain a lot. It even explains what degree of empathy you're born with. They've done studies and they've shown that empathy is something that is passed down from generation to generation. And so that's within the dimension, the 5-factor model domain of agreeableness is empathy, and agreeableness is shown to be inheritable.
But so I think you would agree that then the biology can explain it regardless of whether a creator made the biology or not.
Well, the biology explains what you're most likely to do, what's most probable, what your probable action is in a given situation. What I'm talking about as far as morality and as far as the standards and the duties, that's what you aspire to. So you're born with a certain set of tools, and whether or not you use those tools in a proper manner is what is the question, and whether or not you're fulfilling what you ought to do. And I'm saying that we all ought to share these same moral values and duties. And in my perspective, that comes from God. That's something that transcends generations and cultures.
But biology transcends more than cultures.
Well, biology is individual, so you can only talk about biology on an individual basis.
Oh, it's not
No.
just individual,
Well, it's you look at biology at a population level just to see exactly how populations evolve and adapt to their environments and whether or not they split off on the tree and that kind of thing. But I'm just saying at the individual level, Paul, what you're born with a certain tool set of your certain degree of empathy, your certain degree of different things like conscientiousness, your certain IQ. IQ is also heritable. So you're born with this certain set of tools, and you got a lot of that from your parents, so you're predisposed to act in certain ways.
We all are the winners of the evolutionary race. We are, all of our ancestors lived long enough to have kids. All of us. You know, so really, you know, we're winners of the evolutionary arm race. That's, you know, so the fact that I was born with this set meant that this set was the winning set.
For you, absolutely, absolutely.
Anyway.
So that was a set that got you where you are and got me where I am. We're here. So,
right, and I had kids and you had kids, so.
Oh, you have kids too? I didn't know that.
I have 3, yeah.
Paul has 3.
They're all
Really?
Christians, by the way.
Oh, wow. Did I mention that my sister, I'll just mention this, not to say anything about you guys, but my sister is getting married this coming week at Sanibel, which I'm really excited about. And she has 3 kids and she's marrying a guy who has 1.
Ooh, that's not
Paul
quite
has
a Brady
3 kids
bunch.
and I have 1.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was just pointing that out. Anyway, we're not saying.
I'm just saying. SJ would like us to be married, Paul. She's subtle. Super subtle about it.
But as subtle as a lead balloon, right? I said the same thing to my brother, because my brother's been, if he gets on here and listens to this, he's going to kill me. But he's been dating this girl now for a while in Germany. And I'm like, Mike, it's time. I mean, what are you doing? And so he's like, you are the only one who would say that to me. Yeah, I guess that's true.
I think Shannon and I have a goal of living in the same province first. That might be good.
Yeah. I forgot. You're different provinces in Canada even. Wow.
Also, we both need divorces, for the record. We're both currently married.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Divorces take a long time. They take
Divorces take a long time.
I've been separated for a long time. So anyway.
Okay. Yeah, I totally understand that. That's one of those things. My soon-to-be brother-in-law, his wife had passed away a while back, but my sisters went through a long, very painful divorce. So that's not the best thing. I empathize with you for that. So does anyone else have a question? Oh, one of the questions is, would you live any differently if there were a God? I think I saw that from Heather Schultz. She said, would you live any differently if you thought there were a God than you are right now? Like, would today be any different in any way?
What God?
Yeah, I probably would have gone to church this morning.
Yeah, that depends on if that God requires me to go to church.
I guess, yeah, it depends on the God, yeah, and what they require.
Which God are you talking about? A Christian God? And if you're talking about the Christian God, which Christian God are you talking about? And also faith or works. So I would need more elaboration on that question.
Well, let's go to, and I don't see Heather. Interesting. Okay, so there's another question in here, but let me just say it's the Christian God and it's Jesus. So if would you live any differently?
Faith or works?
Faith. We'll say faith.
And is Jesus God in this scenario? Or
Yes.
Does the Old Testament God existed as he did in the scriptures, and I'm going to burn in a lake of fire if I don't believe in him? and I have evidence that he's compelled. Like, would he have provided enough evidence to me that it would compel me?
I would do at least the minimum to get me out of hell.
Yeah, probably me too. Yeah, but
Okay.
I feel like I already do, with the exception of I don't live my life any different day to day than your average Christian. I don't think. And aside from the fact that I don't believe in God and they do. So if I was judged based on works, I think if you held me up against the average Christian, I'd probably be doing okay.
Also, I think if I became a Christian now, I could make a killing selling books.
Oh my God. Yeah. Could you imagine if you and I, if Paul and I converted to Christianity, and
I would be on a speaking tour. Eric Hovind would have me on stage. Ken Ham would have me at the Ark. Absolutely.
God, let's be dishonest. Let's be completely
go back
dishonest.
and you would go back to Christianity as a YEC. You wouldn't go back to an old Earth creationist.
No, we could be old Earth creationists and we'd still make money.
It depends on what keeps me out of hell. And according to Ken and Eric, that I got to believe the 7 days. So.
Oh no, I was talking about our business plan. Like
if
we were willing to lie and say that we were Christians, we could make a lot of money.
Okay. I'm coming for you, J. Warner Wallace.
Interesting. So, now have you what do you think? Somebody just asked a question. I'm losing it on the screen here, but what do you think is the most convincing argument for either theism or deism? And you've probably seen the cosmological and the teleological and all of those different arguments out there, the moral argument. What do you think, if you had to look at all the arguments I'm sure you've heard over the years, which one seems like the best one?
Do you want to answer, Shannon? Or you want me to?
I think our answers are probably going to be similar.
I think for me, deism, there's nothing. There's nothing. But for theism, if I was to have an adequate personal experience, that would be what it would take.
Yeah, same. It would be, for me, it would be an individual personal experience that I couldn't account for by anything else. I would have had to exhaust all my options, like all my neurological, emotional, everything options. It would have to be an individual personal experience. But oddly enough, other people's arguments from personal experience are the least compelling to me. So
yeah, no, I think that's fair, because you've got an individual level argument for personal experience. At the individual level for you, it would make sense. But if you're looking at the arguments that actually, if you weren't to have an individual experience, you'd have to go out. Like J. Warner Wallace, you mentioned him a couple times. What he did was he started studying a lot of the situations surrounding the resurrection and using his forensic tools and basically put together a case for Christianity as he wrote that book. So he came to it without a personal experience, from what I understand.
Yeah, he may have. I mean, I haven't read his book. I was just involved in a collaboration, actually, where I read excerpts from his book.
Oh, yeah? Which one? Cold Case Christianity, or?
Yeah, Cold Case Christianity. I did it on the Atheist Edge channel. A bunch of us did. Cyrus the Skeptic and Prophet of Zod. And people, people you know.
How did last night go, by the way? I saw my dog is shaking like crazy. I know you can probably hear her. How did last night go? Because I saw you were on your show with Godless Cranium and Seth Andrews, right?
Great. That was a really good discussion, actually. I really enjoyed chatting with Seth. He's a very nice and generous conversationalist. And I appreciated chatting to him.
Okay. I didn't get a chance to listen to that, but I
saw
it. I tweeted it. We
talked about your favorite indigenous tribe, actually, at the beginning of it. You might want to listen to it if you're still writing that blog.
I already wrote that blog, and I've been. I can't even. I don't even want to look at my Twitter account because I had to skip 8 hours worth of tweets that came at me last night from the Sentinelese and my view on John Chow. So so I didn't. I decided I purposely avoid that topic here today. So so it's just been. There's a lot of back and forth on that. So interesting. And now let's see, I see one last question if we have here. I'm trying to find one. Okay, we have Dr. Strangelove. I see a comment. I'll just put it out there. If you think there is a God who has access to the entire universe but spends all his time listening to your prayers, you're a moron. Well, I think that I disagree with him. Heather says, nice discussion. Great to be here. Thank you. How is morality validated? Somebody says that. How is morality validated?
Common goals. It's only you can only validate if two people agree on what the goals are. If you don't agree, you'll never agree on morality.
I think the conversations about morality are subjective. That you can perceive the goals as objective once you agree on what the goals are. That's the only way morality becomes objective to me, is if there's consensus about the goals. Once you agree on the goal, it's objective that that's a goal. And you can objectively find the best way to get there. But until you agree on the goal, It's a subjective process.
So you're sort of like a Sam Harris consequentialist, correct?
I really wish that I had the background in philosophy that would be required to even tell you what I am. Sure, maybe, I have no idea. That's what I think. So whatever you feel like that fits within,
okay,
fine.
That's fair. Well, I wanted to say I think we're getting towards the end, and I know you guys said you had a few minutes a while ago, and I think we've exceeded our few minutes.
It's almost 6. Yeah.
Oh my! Wait, what time is it where you are? 6?
It's almost 6 p.m. where I am.
Oh my gosh, it's 4 where I am. Okay, so I wanted to say thank you so much for coming on here. And I know we had a delightful debate. I don't know if Paul's going to pull clips and put them in some other video, or if I'll find clips in some other videos somewhere else. I know that it would be amusing, I guess, if he did. So I appreciate it. And would you guys like to give a couple of other plugs for where people can find you on both Twitter and I know you've both got very active YouTube channels, and I'll actually get your channels and I'll put them in here so people can click on those.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, first, I just wanted to say thanks to you, SJ, for this is a good and productive, respectful dialogue. So I appreciate you giving us and yourself the opportunity to demonstrate that these are possible. I always enjoy being a part of dialogues where we can prove that just because you are disagreeing with somebody, that doesn't make you enemies or combatants, and that ideas are worth discussing. And just because you fall on different sides of an idea, that doesn't mean that you have to perceive that person as an enemy, and you should, and it's okay to treat people with respect in these dialogues. So I appreciate that always when you and I interact. I'm Shannon Q, and I have a YouTube channel. If you want to subscribe to it, cool. It's called Shannon Q. And my Twitter is Shan_Q0. And it's mostly a dumpster fire. So do with that what you will. All right, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I would echo that. Thanks so much for having us on, SJ. I really appreciate it. And thank you for taking my suggestion that debates with atheists should include at least one atheist. I think that would be a great thing going forward. So I'm at Paulogia, Paulogia, on YouTube, and Paulogia0 on Twitter. And check out what I do there. And I talk about a lot of, as I said, Christian claims and examining them. So if that interests you, come check it out.
All right, great. And let me ask you this before we go. I noticed on both your Twitter accounts, you end your names with a 0. Did you pre-plan that?
Yes. Kind of. He had to. He had to, because somebody, very astute, SJ, somebody already had Paulogia, so we had to put a 0 on the end. And my Twitter handle previously was something different. And when I changed it, I purposefully put a 0 on the end so that the two of us would match, because I thought it was funny. And this was long before I ever thought that I would even have a YouTube channel. I just was like, we're going to be adorable and we're going to be matching. So yes, it was purposeful. Very astute, SJ, but yes, it is.
I look for these little connections, you see. This is important. Like, let's see, they're both from Canada. They both have 0s on their thing.
Also, I wanted you to say sports shirts. Can you say sports shirts for me?
Oh, okay. Anyone who's watching this, you're going to notice that I'm going to post a picture that's going to be the title of this video, that's going to have a picture of Shannon and Paul in sports shirts. When I sent them a DM, it said, I found a picture of you two in matching sports shorts.
And I was like, where would that picture come from?
Also, for Canadians, they're hockey jerseys.
Oh, Jersey. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What's wrong with me? I should have called Jersey. And I forgot the name of the team. What's the team on there?
Edmonton. It was Edmonton Oilers. Yeah.
Oilers. Okay.
We were on our way to an NHL game like 2 weeks ago. It's probably the picture that you saw on my Twitter. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's a good picture. So
it's cute. We all joke about sports ball. Like, it's all fine. It's all good. Yeah.
Great. Well, everybody who came in here, thanks so much. You can reach me on Twitter at lead1225. That's LEAD 1225. And please subscribe or like and visit my regular channel, which is Christian-apologist.com. So thank you so much.
Good night.
Night.